like to call this meeting of the Ellsworth Planning Board to order. It is March 4th, 2020, 6:30 PM. Right, okay. Can we introduce ourselves, please?
Sure. Mark Gretsch.
Nelson Gill.
John Fink.
John Vallejo.
Rick Lyles.
Dave Burks.
Now, the next item of business is the adoption of the minutes from the February 5th meeting. Is there a motion regarding the minutes?
Motion to accept.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving right along.
Now, the third item is preliminary plan review for a major use site development titled McMullen for Richard McMullen. Proposal is to create a 5-acre gravel pit and install a driveway on an undeveloped 95-acre property on the Bucksport Road, currently owned by Maurice Oliver in the rural and industrial zones. Is someone representing the applicant, please? You can, okay, that's good. So for the benefit of the public who may be watching, would you go over what you want to do briefly?
Sure.
Or at length, if you would.
It's exactly the same proposal from the sketch plan review, improving a logging road that's currently on the property, and then creating a up to a 5-acre gravel pit where it's marked out on the lot. So, the current moment, that's the only thing proposed.
I remember the last time there were questions of rights of way. Have those been investigated?
I had Steve look into it, and he couldn't find anything. So other than the potential of the road going over the Haslam piece of property, I have talked to them. I've had a conversation that they're fine with myself traveling over that section. So I assume you'll want some kind of a letter or something.
Yes, and it's certainly for your protection.
Yeah, I mean, I can always move the road, but at the moment,
Yeah, but once you have it in place, who wants to move it?
right, so, yeah.
But I got a question about that right away though, but does that give the Haslams a right of way over your property?
No, that there's like a little 5-acre section, and what it is there's roughly 200 feet of road that goes across that I need their permission to cross.
Okay.
So they're not accessing my land in a sense. I need that to get across theirs. So.
So there's no reciprocity or anything involved there.
Right.
They know that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to them last week.
They're missing a bit here. They could charge you a toll over that section.
Right.
Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, how deep is a 5-acre gravel pit?
It's all based on where the water table is.
Okay, that was my next question, so just keep on talking.
So the state requires certain slopes on the edges of your pit. So when working in a small pit, they don't require monitoring for the water. So essentially what happens is once you dig down and find that water, that's where you have to stop. So I don't actually know how deep I can go. We could obviously do some figuring on the grades and the slopes inside a 5-acre and say what the max depth is, but I've done some test holes and I believe that there really isn't much more than 15, 20 feet at the moment, from what I can gather.
From the existing ground surface.
Yeah, I mean, that's as far as I can dig, but it didn't seem, it wasn't getting any better, so.
And the state has regulations that govern if there are any issues with groundwater problems or anything like that?
Yes.
That are actually beyond us, I suppose.
Right, I've filled out the permit by rule that's required to, you know, comply with their regulations on having a 5-acre pit. And then anything beyond that, there's a lot more regulation. But 5 acres is just a permit by rule for surface water.
And if you were to expand this 5-acre thing into a larger thing, would it have to come back before the board, or would that be how would that work? That's as much a question to John as it is to you, I suppose.
I wouldn't, I guess I don't have an answer for that question, but I know there's a lot more permitting through the state for it. That's what he told, he told me it would be in my best interest to stay under 5 acres, so. We didn't
And
get into-
not only say it, but actually do it, right?
Yeah, we didn't get into the conversation of what was required after that, because at the moment, with digging some test holes further back in the property in areas, I'm not confident there's much more material there
Okay.
anyway.
I guess my question really is if we, approve the 5-acre thing that you're currently proposing, that doesn't preclude, well, if you wanted to come back and say, let's double the size, because I found some more stuff down there, I assume that our approving 5 acre does not say, oh, he can go ahead and do that.
It would be a modification to the site plan, so
Okay.
especially if it was another 5 acres, let's say, absolutely come back to the planning board, and he would have to file another, some sort of paperwork permit potentially with the DEP, so there would be the double check there.
Okay.
again. I'd assume too, if you expanded the operation further, that could implicate other things.
Okay, and so you would have to go back to the state, though?
Yes, definitely,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And then presumably us?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
So I'd asked this question last time, but I appreciate it to refresh my memory because I don't recall the
Yeah.
answer. Is there blasting involved with either starting or operating the pit?
No.
Would you have any issues with that being a condition of approval, that there is no blasting?
I don't see an issue with that at the moment.
Did you receive a copy of the letter from the St. Tillo family?
Yes.
I noticed on that, there's about a 200-foot, between that 5-acre block that you proposed to mine, there's about there's a 200-foot buffer, I guess, to the property line. And then from where, there's another 600 feet, maybe 400 feet to the edge of the Clark's property. And St. Tillo's are talking about possibly extending Woodland Road to do a subdivision, and they were concerned about what impact digging into the bank would have. But it appears that it'd be a good 600 feet from the edge of your gravel pit to the property line of the Santillos. But in that area, that 200-foot buffer has been logged off. If there is an expansion, would you look to go into that 200 feet? I mean, I'd like to see that 200 feet remain as a buffer of some sorts of noise. I mean, there's also that Clark piece that acts as a buffer, to block the noise for the residents living on Woodland Road. I mean, would you foresee going further towards Woodland Road, if it was?
Yeah, I think you can see Steve put the 50-foot buffer on there. That's what's required for the state.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to get any closer than that, but I would say that if I do mine out the whole 5 acres, that would be the direction where the gravel is towards the Clark property. But I think that's many years away, and I'd have to come back here anyway, so.
I recall, I mean, last time there was some discussion, and I believe some of the residents who were here, that there may be possibly ATV, UTV trails on this piece of property that goes off, and actually some of them end up over on Red Bridge. I mean, I would like to see those trails, I don't know whether it's an organized trail or just a woods road, but I mean, I'd like to see them closed so people couldn't access, you know, because people love to ride around gravel pits.
Right. I don't know what kind of traffic comes in from the Red Bridge Road, and yeah, I have no idea what kind of foot traffic or vehicle traffic there is on the trail. I know it's quite rough, so it's probably just an ATV trail. But I could easily block off or reroute, you know, I don't have any problem creating a path for people to use, if there is.
I mean, I don't think it's more that people are coming in from Red Bridge, because
Right.
I have a woodlot, not that I own, but that I have access to, and there's times that I'm in there cutting wood, and I know people come through from the Bucksport Road and through this woodlot.
Yeah.
And it's more, I think, people that may be coming in from Woodland Road rather than the other way around. But, you know, kind of help safeguard the peace and quiet of those neighbors. Yeah, I would just like to see something done that, to try and cut out as best you can.
Okay.
You know, somebody coming in.
Just
and
some rocks or
playing
something and-
Playing in your
Yeah,
gravel
yeah.
pit.
And there,
And I think from a liability standpoint. it'd be
yeah,
good.
definitely, and the state did require a gate at the end of the road too, so, for my driveway entrance, so there won't be potentially people just driving in when we're not there. That was a side note on my state entrance.
Are you through? Picking right up on the gate thing, okay? It was in the letter from MDOT and so forth. And I would just caution that gate chain, whatever, be back far enough from Route 1 that when vehicles are, like a truck, is stopped coming in, to, you know, undo the gate.
Right,
Or
yeah.
the other way around, when
Yep.
they're exited and they need to, you know, kind of chain up behind, that space be big enough.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't want that to be, you know, 23 feet back from the edge of the
Right,
pavement, so
like
I would
100
just
feet or
caution you
something,
that.
but I can have that added to the.
I would think it would be a good idea
Yeah.
to add it to the site plan
Okay.
personally. Is that okay with you guys? That way it's just clear all the way
Yep.
around. And the access road is just gonna be gravel improved?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the additional runoff, any additional runoff from that road is pretty minimal, I would assume. I think that's it for me, personally.
And the access road coming in from Route 1, I mean, the way it depicts it on the diagram kind of comes out on Route 1 at an angle. You're gonna be more squaring that off, so it's a right angle.
Yeah, I could have them straighten that out. There is quite a straight section there where, there was like an old, landing zone for logging. So there's quite an area there, that is straight on, so, yeah. I can have them change that on the map.
Yep.
Just so it shows it straight.
That'd be appropriate.
That'd be
that
good. I agree.
Trucks coming out, or vehicles coming out would be coming out at a right angle.
Yeah, no, it's definitely square.
Further questions? This is a public hearing. Everyone is entitled to speak on this matter. I ask that before you speak, you be recognized by the chair and then go up to the lectern and state your name for the record. Does anyone wish to speak? I hear no one. Public hearing is closed.
Oh, I've got one question. I forgot I was gonna send an email to Larry Gardner. Did I see where a street address been assigned to this road?
Yes, I had a street address assigned.
Don't street addresses only get assigned to structures? I mean, why would we number
I think it was a concern, from the fire department, if there's an emergency, I could give an address.
Okay, good, I mean, just be 575 Bucksport Road.
Yeah.
It's a 911 thing.
Also allows you to put a big sign there announcing your address.
Right.
Put it on the gate.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Did you want a flashing lighted sign? Or-
Yeah, that'd be good.
What would the board like to do? I'm patient.
Patient, good. I would motion that we approve the preliminary plan review for a major use to site development entitled, development plan entitled McMullen. And you could fill in all the rest of that stuff. Tax map 31, lot 47.
I'll second it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Do you mind if I speak? You'll see that the applicant provided a waiver request, and typically at a preliminary plan meeting, the board would review that waiver
But those-
request. Sorry?
As I recall reading, the requests were things that were not applicable.
That's right.
I don't know that we actually need to specifically waive them because they're not applicable.
Right, so the ordinance does say that if they are not applicable, then you still have to provide a waiver request.
We need to change that. That's the model. Anyway, so the waiver requests.
So if you, I don't know if you have your ordinance in front of you, it's 6029. Planning board may modify or waive any of the submission requirements when it determines that because of the size of the project or circumstances of the site, such requirements would not be applicable. And that such modifications or waiver would not adversely affect the abutting landowners or the general health, safety, and welfare of the city. So if you look at the technical review team report, there were a couple suggestions regarding the waiver request. To either potentially add or take away from what was there. And then with the motion, I would just ask that when you do make a motion for waivers, that you cite section 602.9, if you don't mind.
No.
I know, I'm asking a
We could not
lot.
do that, giving you an incentive to quit your job and could be on the planning board. No,
I don't think my boss would be happy.
You never know.
Or my coworkers, apparently.
That, yeah.
Apparently
that
they
too.
like me.
That too.
you're making a.
So do we need to modify that motion then? Is that what that's the bottom line here, or?
No, we would have you'd have a separate motion.
A separate motion, okay.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Aside from the waiver request, I would just ask that a few things be looked at on the technical review team report. There is a missing letter from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife that's required, as well as a road profile. Applicant is proposing to have a site road there, as well as a narrative of stormwater management and erosion control.
If I may, the stormwater management is the application I've currently filled out and waiting for a response from the state. And I will, give you some information on the best management practices, that the state would require me to follow, when I get the, approved stormwater
Okay.
application.
We would just ask that it be in narrative format and not just what's within the application.
Do we really need to have a road profile? I mean, this is basically a driveway.
Well, it's an existing road.
If it were a driveway, then it would be a different set of standards. If we look at, Article 9, there are standards for a driveway in there, and we could just put that on the site plan and say that the applicant would meet those requirements for a commercial driveway. However, if I'm looking at the site plan correctly, I believe that the applicant is choosing a site road.
Yeah, he's called it a proposed access road.
So at the top, site entrance cross-section dimensions show here on are taken from City of Ellsworth Street Design Standards. Site road, street type number 10. Where does it say standards for a site road? I know it's on here.
Page 13, is that what you're talking about? Chapter 56?
Sorry?
You're talking about that one little paragraph that's on the plan, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Standards, page 13, oh.
Yeah, so if I go to street type 10, it's for a site road.
Okay,
So if it was for a driveway, we'd be looking at a different set of standards for a commercial driveway. But we're looking at what the applicant has said is meeting standards for a site road. The little diagram that shows the entrance at the front here, the site entrance cross-section, shows that he meets it with the 22-foot wide and 30-foot long. But we would ask that if it is going to be a site road, that you meet the standards of Article 9, which says that you have to provide a plan profile showing that you meet those standards.
okay. You win. I mean, it's a good idea.
If it were a commercial driveway, we could most likely go along with just having a small cross-section of what that driveway were to look like, and potentially say this is typical commercial driveway, will meet the standards shown on
Gotcha.
within,
So what's the difference between the site road and a commercial driveway?
Different, presumably different standards, right?
Yeah,
Slightly?
But
yeah, so you have to have minimum width with shoulders.
I mean, the purpose thereof. Why is this not a driveway?
The applicant has chosen that it be a site road.
Yeah, that's his declaration.
Okay. Definitions matter.
Yeah. So I would just ask the board consider the fact that those few things are missing from the application package. And also please consider the waiver request.
Do you want me to go through the performance, not the performance standards, the submission requirements? Each part, so we can note which waivers we need?
Probably helpful, consider he's asking for quite a few waivers.
Yeah, because.
Just one thing that might be helpful, he did supply the board with a submission materials list.
Yes. Normally, we would, for, say, 606.7 existing site conditions. We would just know, you know, in making the determination that it's complete, we wouldn't be going down each and every little thing because, you know, there's no existing infrastructure.
That's right.
I think it's foolish to make a specific exemption for these things.
So his waiver request is not for existing site conditions, it's for 606.8. The majority of them are in 606.8. So the proposed site conditions,
Yeah.
and you'll see on the technical review team, report that, he did ask for wastewater disposal, which is 606.8K. Of course, there's no wastewater there because it's not necessary, so we asked for a waiver, which is good.
Why would you need a waiver if?
Because it's not applicable to the project.
We've never done it this way. Because if you need a waiver, it's because you're not doing something that's required. How can you waive something that he's not doing? Do you see what I'm saying?
If you can modify something if it is required.
He's
Can
not
have it-
required to have water, for example.
No, so it's not applicable to the project.
Right,
Which means
so-
a waiver makes, the waiver is for, if you are saying that something's complete, you have to check all the boxes, right? So you wouldn't be able to check K or L in the 606.8, which would be for wastewater or drinking water, unless it's documented through some other way. And the documentation that we have is through the waiver process. So it's saying you're complete except for these things. And the reason why these things aren't here is because they're waived from this project because they're not applicable.
I just don't agree with that interpretation. If he's not in violation of a requirement. In other words, if we had a requirement that, say, a gravel pit had to have sanitary facilities, we didn't want to do that, then we would be looking at a waiver. But if it's something that is not happening by the nature of the project, then that section simply doesn't apply. When we get asked for waivers, it's because something is required, and the applicant would ask not to be forced to do that because of whatever, and if we agree with his reasoning that it's not harming the public and so forth, then, you know, we grant the waiver, but I can't remember a time when we have waived things because they're not applicable. Would you like to perhaps we should have MMA Legal answer this question.
I would just say that this isn't the first time I've had waiver requests for non-applicable things. And like I said, if somebody were to appeal this and say, why did your board say that this was complete when such and such wasn't in here? It's because there was a waiver request that was approved. But, like I said, and I would also say that it says directly in 602.9 that would not be applicable. I mean, I think it's something that's fairly straightforward, that the applicant has submitted the request. I've looked at the request. I think there's 3 modifications to this.
On the application itself.
I'm sorry?
It says, does the applicant intend to request waivers of any city ordinance provision for this marked no?
What was that?
Marked no. There were no requests for waivers.
There is. It's right here.
Well, when I filled out the
No,
application
I think he's talking about.
months ago, that was before, they asked me to do that, and I clearly didn't change it on the application.
And then this is the,
Yeah.
this is the subsequent on the 25th, he asks for that set.
Ah, that's
As
what I
as a
didn't,
separate request.
that's what I didn't say. Okay.
So they're at least summarized.
Yes, well, that's,
There's one thing I find difficult to understand the application is, and I realize this is probably the first time you've ever been here.
Right.
And most of the, well, all the other time, when we have a pack of information, it's in a binder, so instead of, I mean, you have 10, 12 different two-page things stapled together, and we're trying to thumb through everything to try and figure out what's going on, it just makes it difficult.
So can we just,
well, for example here, 6068C, sign, location, front view, dimensions. There is no proposed sign. There's no requirement for a sign. This is only if he is proposed, if the applicant is proposing a sign, that it be on the application. How can we're waiving something that doesn't demand any action,
But aren't we
except
wa-
if you are going to have a sign.
Aren't you waiving the need for that
No,
thing?
you need to show the location, front view, and dimensions of the sign if there is a sign. If there is no sign, then that,
Then it's not applicable and therefore can be waived without harming the general welfare.
it doesn't have to
Safety
be
or
waived,
health.
because if he were to have,
What I think, John,
there's no requirement in the ordinance that he have a sign.
I think, Mr. Chairman, what we're trying to say, what staff is trying to say, is that if you leave something blank, it can be questioned. If you waive it in the application, there is no question. You never go back to it again because it's been waived, it's not required. Staff's making a recommendation,
Yeah, well,
you're the chairman.
If
You
the
can
board
make any
does,
decision you
if the
want.
board does this, then it is going to slow things up tremendously, because many, many applications don't have signs, they don't have septic systems. And if you're not putting in a septic system, then you don't, there's no requirement that you give us the information on it.
I think staff would be willing to have it all written up for the planning board to make, so you won't have to go through and check everything. We're trying to start out new, and we're trying to follow the ordinance toward how it was written. It might be a shock, we're running all kinds of things that are shocking us, but we're just trying to, the last thing we ever want is to get challenged in court and get something thrown out because the attorney says, well, you should have this. It's not waived, why didn't you waive it? If it's not waived, it's required. I think that's where Jen is coming from, we're just trying to
But
clean it up.
but a sign, for example, is not required. There's no requirement in the
But
ordinance.
it is a submission requirement in this ordinance to have a sign. If it is not applicable, then it's a simple waiver to
No,
say,
no, it's not a requirement to have a sign.
it's not a requirement to have a sign. However, our ordinance is telling us that these are the submission materials for a preliminary plan that are required.
may I ask a
If,
question?
I will just repeat, if there is no sign, there is no requirement to have that material submitted. All you have to say is there is no sign. There is none on any of the plots in the narrative at all. So I would like to
Perhaps
leave-
a reasonable way to go about this would be to ask legal council for advice.
No, we'll do that in the future, but tonight we have to make a motion.
May I ask a question? Is this piece of paper, you directed Mr. McMullen to do this?
Yeah, we've said, based on 602.9,
So if we move to accept this here, would that make everybody happy?
yes, except, after looking at these, I think that since there is no drinking water on the site, that 6068L could also be added to the waiver list, which is not on there currently. Also, the applicant listed 6068Q, which is the letter from IF&W. That is a necessary item for this application, as we need to know if there's any critical areas on the property that could be disturbed. And 6068R is listed on there, except he did get feedback from Maine Historic Preservation Commission already. So those two, 6068Q and R could be removed, and 6068L could be added to the list.
Drinking water?
Sorry?
You're saying 606.8L?
Yeah, drinking water. There is no,
Indication of the type of water supply systems if there be.
To be used.
The answer is none. All you would have
Exactly.
to state in the application is none. We
so
don't
either
need-
he could write on the plan that there will be no drinking water or wastewater disposal on
And
this
all the rest of those
property.
things.
Or he could get a waiver for it and we could be documented that way. It's up to the board. Ultimately, all of this is up to the board. However, as staff that's trying to make a recommendation so that, we do things
Why
according to the
don't-
ordinance.
Well, that's like a little different tack. Why don't we humor you and do this? But request a legal opinion as to whether it's necessary to do this when things simply don't apply.
No problem.
Yeah, you get that determination going forward, and
Yep.
I mean, it kinda sounds, at this point, after what, everything you've discussed, John, is that the application is really not complete. I mean, it kinda sounds like it should go back to Mr. McMullen to work with staff to get us something that you're not adding stuff right now for waivers and, cause at this point, I'm totally confused.
Yeah, I would say, there are some items that are missing from the packet, but the waiver request does stand, as a request that even if we came back to another meeting, I would still, yes, I would ask an attorney if my interpretation is right. However, I would also, still recommend that the waiver request be presented to this board.
What do we wish to do?
But you said there's several items that are missing off of here, and something needs to be deleted, you said?
Yep.
the list of, yeah. there was-
Yeah, on here.
I'm not trying to confuse you. There's two items that are listed on here that the applicant actually would need to supply to the board. And there's one that's not listed that is not applicable. So I'm just making the suggestion that if you were to approve this waiver request, which I think is valid, that you would add 6068L to the waiver request list and remove 6068Q and 6068R.
We do, or the applicant does?
The board could make a
Revised list.
motion and revise the list in the motion.
Well, why would you eliminate Q and R?
Not needed.
A lot of it's not needed.
Because he needs to, no, you would remove them from the waiver request list because they are necessary in the application package.
Ah,
And he's
I
already
see
gotten
what you
stuff
mean.
on those, the
Okay.
two
Yes.
things.
From when we had the technical review meeting, I was still receiving stuff via
Right,
email
and some
and
of that
mail.
stuff is
So
here.
I brought some extra stuff in that I got after the technical review, so I think that's where some of the confusion is, because I was still waiting for.
In terms
them
of
to-
what goes in and off. the-
Yeah, so my waiver request has some things on it when I printed that up and brought it to the technical review, things changed over the next week or two, and I didn't update because I'd already brought the packets in, and so,
Why is you on the list of requests? There is no requirement for an owners association.
Exactly, it's not applicable.
So why do we have to waive it if it is not applicable?
Well,
Because-
are we basically saying?
Should I go back to
here that-
602.9?
Here's a list of things that, you know, I just to make a little exclamation point there. But here's a list of things that any applicant has to do, A, B, C, signs, whatever, okay? And what you're suggesting is that at one level, everybody's required to do that. And if there's no sign, for example, then you just simply waive that requirement and go on your merry way.
That's right.
Yep.
And what John is arguing is that the fact that there is no sign proposed, then you don't need a waiver, right?
Exactly.
I go with them, actually.
But what we're trying to do is not leave any empty spaces.
Sure, no, I get that. I mean, I understand what you said before, which was, you know, you try to circle around and get all this stuff taken care of. Should it ever come up again, you can come back to the thing and say, these were the waivers, you know. And in essence, the waiver means that it's simply not required.
Oh, but then you can get into a legal argument as whether we properly waived it. Whether it was actually in our authority to waive it.
Section 602.9 gives you the authority to waive. So basically,
Yeah,
John,
based on-
what you're saying is that
The authority to waive based on,
based on the fact that it would not adversely affect abutting landowners or the general health, safety, and welfare of the city. So when you make a motion for a waiver, that typically needs to be added into the motion, saying the board is waiving these items because they are not applicable to the project and they would not adversely affect the abutting landowners or the general health, safety, and welfare of the city. The board has that authority.
yes. And the argument again would be to challenge based on that the board improperly granted the waiver when, and no waiver is required.
Well, it seems to me that that's a nuance. I mean.
It is.
It's a nuance that needs to be resolved once and for
Right.
all by an attorney, however you do those things.
Or at
Which is
least
what I
the-
would recommend personally. And then going forward, you either grant waivers on these things or you do not, you know, based on whatever that opinion was. But that still leaves us with this one, which is what exactly do we do?
Yes.
Do we just simply grant a waiver with the idea that, you know, the next one we won't have to, perhaps, or can we do that?
We can do that,
Seems to me that's the
Yes.
cleanest way to move forward.
okay? I will stop arguing.
Wait, do you mind repeating what you just said?
No, yes, I will. Because I'm not sure I can say it again.
I think the concern is setting the precedent by this one motion. That's the
Right.
concern. So
Right.
there's the idea of making this motion so that we can let Richard go home. But the concern is, we don't necessarily want that to be binding relative to this
Going
process
forward.
forever.
The-
Because some of the board are not convinced yet.
So basically, we can get a legal review of that terminology, but we can't say that we're not going to do this again moving forward if the advice that comes back from the attorney says this is what needs to happen moving forward.
Yeah, no, if the
Okay.
advice of the attorney
I just
says.
wanna
you
make
do-
that clear.
You know, you do waivers just like you're proposed
Yeah.
here, then I would suggest that everything that comes down the pike after this would get a set of waivers.
But
If,
the application should include waiver request specific, that is a list of what should be waived.
Right, this effort that happened this time, that we
Yeah.
don't typically see, thank you for doing it, would need to be the norm, because it's not realistic to have the board
No.
recognize what's not.
No, which is why we asked for the waiver request.
so a waiver request in future, if they're gonna be required like this, needs to say, not required, waivered because simply not applicable, or
That's right.
whatever the message is.
So luckily, in this instance, all of them are be asked to be waived because they're not applicable. But if there were other circumstances behind it, then we would have asked for a better another explanation.
All I'm saying
Yep.
is that to make the paperwork complete, you know, it's no big deal to have, you know, 8 more lines typed in there saying basically, you know, we're waiving this because it's not relevant, not applicable in your terms. Yeah?
Yep.
You good with that?
Yes,
And can we go forward then?
we need a motion.
I think there's a motion on the floor, right? But it may need to be amended.
The motion that's on the floor is actually for the site development, not for
For the waivers.
the, we haven't addressed the waivers yet.
That's right, okay. So
Okay,
let's do,
one more question.
go.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's listed all kinds of waivers for 606.8, and he's listed the letters that he wants waivers for. But going down through it, okay, he hasn't listed a waiver for septic system. He hasn't listed a waiver for lighting. If these don't apply, doesn't he need a waiver for everything that doesn't apply? I mean, you go through that, traffic,
Whatever.
fire suppression, I don't know, landscaping. Landscaping doesn't apply, but he hasn't asked for a waiver.
That's right.
So if
What's the
we're going
difference?
down through all these letters to say, we have to address each one of those, if I understand what you're saying, that he either has to come up with a plan for O, or we have to waive it. Is that kind of what you're
My
saying?
takeaway.
That's correct.
Okay, so,
So then the question becomes, why hasn't he asked for a waiver of?
for landscaping,
Right.
for park and open space.
So the board has the ability to go through what the request is and also what is here and modify that, the waiver request. Or to say,
No, because if he hasn't requested it, what we would do is say, okay, we want a landscaping plan, for example. And then it's up to him to say, no, it's not, I request a waiver, but at this point, it's not requested. I don't think we can just add waivers on the applicant's behalf. It is up to the applicant to request these. And if it's not waived, then
I think
the
what,
application is not complete.
there may be some confusion between the list that I generated, and the waiver request, because there is, like, for the septic system, I wrote in, there won't be a septic system, and I didn't, so that, I kinda answered that question over here, but then, so it wasn't on the waiver request. I did answer every item on it, but it bounces back and forth between the writing, so I think there's, maybe that's where the issue lies.
So in 606.7, for example, you've got no existing sewer, no well, no culverts.
Right.
And that's not on the waiver request because you explicitly said.
I
no, this,
gave
no
an
that.
actual description of why, and all the other things were so obvious that they weren't, needed. I just put not applicable and asked for the waiver,
Okay,
so.
so these missing ones that John just identified
Yeah,
have actually
they're on
been
the,
addressed
they're on the
somewhere.
list that you should have, yeah, so. I did put an answer to every
But
item.
what the city is now saying is that, doesn't matter whether he says that it's not. Because it's not, we have to waive the requirement.
So the 602.9 requirement, am I correct in assuming that's not specific to 606.8 proposed site conditions? That's a general rule for waivering requirements? Which, again, gets to what you just said, which is, all of this list needs to be much longer, is what
It says that we may waive, it doesn't say that we must.
that's right.
And it seems to me when something just doesn't apply, that there's no need for a waiver because there is no need for a waiver. In other words, if let's see.
recognize the desire to improve the process, but I would offer that on this point, waiving some but not all is more confusing after the fact. Like if someone would come back and like forensically look at the, look at the application, like why are 606.8 requirements waived, but not the 606. And after the fact, it's gonna be very confusing and hard to explain. So it is sort of an all or nothing, it feels like. And by nothing, I just mean
Yeah,
the legacy mode we've been in, right or wrong, or all of the non-applying.
we used to go down each application. We would read all these requirements. And as we're doing that, it would be, fire suppression doesn't apply, not needed. And then we made our determination of completeness based on that, but that was a very lengthy process. And we decided not to do it that specifically. If it didn't apply, it didn't apply. We weren't expecting it to be on the application. The application was complete because it wasn't needed.
I understand. I think that, several things. First, there are a lot of new members on this board who haven't gone through that process before. And when that process was sort of eliminated, it's my understanding that there were people on the board who were comfortable with the ordinance, who had gone through it and knew what the submission requirements were and could comfortably say whether something was not applicable or not. I also think that we have a lot of developers that are coming into the city that are new, and it is good to practice to explain to them what is necessary and what is not necessary, and what the board is going to expect and what you're not going to expect with going through the process.
What we expect is if the applicant has gone through this, each requirement, and when it's required, put it on the application. We do not require a sign.
Understood. However, one of the things that was not provided was a stormwater narrative, and I think that, coming from staff, it's something that should be provided in this packet and shouldn't,
What would that narrative cover? Would it cover the existing condition?
both.
If you had, say, major runoff onto another property, nothing that is proposed that is an existing condition. You can't, I'm not sure you're going to require an applicant to correct an existing condition where if it were, nothing were being developed, it would exist, it would continue. If you're not
The applicant is
doing-
going to be improving a road. There's an existing road there, but it's going to be improving a road. And also going to be creating a gravel pit, which means clearing land. We've had several applications in the past where they have described the stormwater narrative, talking about, he was talking about the sloping and things like that on the edges. So further describing that in narrative format, so there's something else to go off of other than what he's been narrating here at the meeting tonight. I'll just make a suggestion that, considering staff thinks there's several items that are still missing from the application, that we could potentially table this application.
No, we can't. We just passed a motion that it's.
We didn't pass a motion.
We didn't?
We haven't.
No, we haven't voted on it.
Move off, okay.
We can get the recommendation about the waiver request. We can give the applicant more time to provide the information that could potentially be missing. If the board wanted to, we could combine the preliminary and the final on one night, since the public hearing was already open and closed this evening. We already had one public hearing. It's just a suggestion.
What we have done in the past is when we have things that are missing that need to be on the final, that the applicant is just directed to present those on the that the final must be complete.
Complete but not complete.
Well, that all that information must be on the final. And therefore, we're not holding the applicant up with perhaps a second preliminary. Because if we do a second preliminary, the public must be able to comment on what we're doing. It's not ended, it's still going on.
Right. So, you have the technical review team report that has the suggestions of things that the staff has reviewed and, items that, believe are still missing, so welcome the board to review that.
So make sure I'm reading not trying to be funny, but sort of the double negative. So the removing Q and R on the TRT report really means that there should be a Q and R submission as part of the application.
That's right, and
Yeah.
like I said, you don't have to move on a waiver request tonight. You can move on a waiver request at a final plan. It's common practice to move on a waiver request during preliminary, but it's not required, so.
So to break these into two levels, though, from the staff position, what I feel is the most important thing is staff feels like there are some elements that are missing that should be part of the application package. That's probably, in my mind, most important thing. Secondary thing is the process for waiving and recording the 602.9 needs to be hammered out. Yeah. And I know we've been talking about it for an hour now, but if you could, again, direct my eyes. So there's 606.8 Q and R, and what else was the staff feels not included but should be?
On the waiver request?
Not in the waiver request, in the actual application.
Oh,
In
so,
the- In the site plan.
They said a plan and profile for the road,
right, so.
which was a question we had a while ago.
So if you have the technical review team report in front of you, we are waiting on a letter from the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife in regards to critical natural areas. A road profile, and any documentation for a right-of-way over the Haslam property. A letter from the fire department pertaining to emergency vehicle access.
So that is 6 items. A letter from Fisheries and Wildlife, 606.8 Q and R, the right-of-way statement for the Haslam property.
No, so, sorry, just to go back, 606.8Q is the letter from IFNW. 606.8R, the applicant has submitted input from the Maine Historic Preservation Commission
So
already.
we got that, okay. The road profile and the fire department letter.
That's right, and the stormwater narrative and erosion control plan.
So those are all things that could be handled between a preliminary and a final approval, is that correct? And we're talking about a preliminary approval now, and these things would have to be, if the board says, then they would have to be addressed between now and the next meeting, let's say. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I guess I'd have to ask if there's so much information, data that is missing out of this application, why is the application before us, even on a preliminary?
Because the board still has the ability to determine an application is complete or not at a preliminary level.
So if we waive the stormwater, for example, feeling that there's no damage done to any other party, citizens of Ellsworth, I think that would be a foolish way to go about it. I've said this many times before, but an application should not come to the board if it is not complete. Because we shouldn't be spending our time here talking about things that are missing. They should be here. And if it's not in the paperwork, it shouldn't come to us. Otherwise, we don't need staff. We could just do that all ourselves. But there is staff, there is a there is a review, and if things are missing, it should not go to the board until it is complete. That's your job at this point. If you
We've
would like us
provided a
to-
memo that gives you an indication of the things that we feel has been missing from the application. We
Then-
cannot stop a developer or an applicant from coming before the board.
That was my question.
We
I think-
cannot.
So if they just decide that
We
they're gonna
can,
come
we
with a
can
preliminary
advise,
anyway,
but we
that they can just
cannot.
do that.
That's right.
then it would be within the board's purview to say, to look at an application, say, not complete table. We don't have to tell the applicant what's not there. There's no requirement for us to do that. The burden is always on the applicant.
You're right, you make a determination on completeness, and if it's complete or if it's not complete. And in the past, you are right, John, or Mr. Chair, you have made a determination that it is complete except for, and named the following items. So it is up to the board what you would like to do this evening.
Just maybe one of that was-
I-
wanted to say something.
When I came in a month or so ago, Larry gave me all these items we've been talking about, and on 607 state, it says state and federal permits, and he underlined final meeting, so I was under the impression that I didn't even need some of this information until the final meeting. So I could have been more prepared, I guess, myself, but, Larry kinda highlighted the stuff I needed to fill out, and I was under the impression that I did most of those things, so.
You don't need the permit until the final plan, and on the TRT report, we have provide the signed DEP permit for the gravel pit for final plan, not for preliminary plan.
Okay. We were just talking about how I didn't have that stuff though, so,
No, it's not required for the preliminary.
It's not.
okay.
Now, there is a motion on the floor that has been made and has been seconded.
So you can hold a vote and see if it goes through or not. That's how we would
Yes,
clear that, if you want to.
so,
Can you restate the motion?
No, the motion was simple, just to accept the preliminary plan.
Yeah, as written,
That was the
item- as
motion,
written in
basically.
item 3.
yeah.
Okay.
The motion was as written in item 3.
Are we prepared to vote? All in favor of the motion, please? Opposed? Okay.
I guess we're opposed.
Okay, we still haven't made any determination of completeness or incompleteness.
Well, I think the list of what's complete and not is fairly clear, right? From the TRT report and in conjunction with the list of, the waivers, right? So what would be required is to find out what the appropriate, path is with relative to these waivers. That's one thing. And then that's not only for this applicant, but for all other applicants as well going forward. And based on what John just said, that the things like the wastewater plan or whatever, that those things need to be part of the preliminary package.
Stormwater or waste?
I'm sorry? I'm sorry, stormwater. It said wastewater. Yeah, stormwater, sorry. And as well as the other things that the TRT people listed.
Now, in the past, when we've done the application complete except for, then we have always told the applicant that we expect them on the final. And we don't have, and that completes the preliminary, we just go right through to final. Is that a problem? Okay, you might ask again the attorney about that particular thing.
The ordinance states, "The intent of the preliminary plan meeting is for the planning board to make a determination of completeness of material submissions, as well as identify issues and constraints that must be addressed in the final plan meeting."
Yes, but we can't, technically, we can't say that it's complete but for, we have to say it's incomplete, and therefore we do a whole other preliminary. I'm trying, I prefer that we be able to just flip it right to the final, because we're not, at this stage, we're not making any judgment as to whether the information is any good, just that there is something there. So it's almost like, why do we do a preliminary? Because it's required.
So, based on the fact that there's now are no motions pending, okay, relative to the preliminary plan, are we gonna be reviewing a preliminary plan next time, and then a month after that doing a final plan? Or can we combine those two somehow?
We can do-
Because I don't want the applicant to be the, kind of the, you know, the.
Well, the ordinance doesn't strictly permit doing a preliminary and a final in one go. So if we're gonna do it strictly, the answer is, it's incomplete, come back another time for a preliminary, and we do that. It just pushes that final off when I think it's not reasonable to do it. Maybe we need to change our ordinance a little.
Didn't we just not too long ago,
Yeah,
like a
for-
meeting or two ago,
Yeah.
combine a
Awards,
preliminary and a final
right.
at the same meeting?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
But I'm not sure the ordinance really says that you can do that.
Well, they were two separate actions though at that particular meeting.
Yeah.
And if we can't do that, then we
But
can't do it.
there,
But we did it.
Yeah.
I vaguely recall, and I could be wrong, that there has to be a gap between the two, but in a strict reading.
A gap,
And again,
I guess, in between one meeting and the next, or
Yeah,
12
but that
minutes.
I may be thinking of past versions of the ordinance.
Well, you know, at the meeting that was
Yeah.
a couple sessions ago, there was a one motion, and then we kind of went through the thing and
Yeah.
had a second motion for the final.
Yeah.
Could we table this, Mr. Chairman? Would that solve the problem if it's tabled?
Well, nothing's on the.
No, because,
There's nothing
well,
to table now,
The reason
per
that
se. I mean, table motions.
I'm reluctant to just table everything, or even then do the preliminary final at the next
Yes.
meeting, okay,
Yes.
okay.
No,
Because that doesn't hold anyone up.
No.
Except our arguing here, which is held. I hope there was
we're
nothing that you were
listening, yeah.
planning to do
What's that?
this evening. Okay, so we can either have, I think it might be cleanest at this point for us to just table it till the next meeting, which will be preliminary and final in 2 stages.
but at the same meeting.
Yeah. Which is-
And that keeps you in essence on the schedule that you are currently
Yes,
on.
That's my goal.
Could you like that in a motion form?
Yes?
Chairman?
Do you need that in motion for?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to table this item agenda to the- whatever meeting you decide to come back at with both a preliminary and a final. Whether that be next month or
Yeah.
whenever.
Yep, whatever.
Is there a second to that, please?
I'll second that.
Discussion? All in favor, please. I should have stayed sick, I didn't have to do this.
But bearing in mind that,
Yeah.
the idea is to have both the preliminary and the final done next time, I mean, all this stuff is gonna have to be
And the
done.
Right.
preliminary,
I may or may not be back in a month then, because that
Yeah, no,
only leaves me
that's-
2 weeks to
no,
hear
no,
back from the state and all that, so.
that timing is up to you.
Right, yeah, it's just waiting for,
Yeah.
You can-
We
Not to
have in
throw
the
a monkey
past-
wrench, but
well,
if you don't have your final approval from the DEP, we could make it a condition to
Yeah,
final.
or the IFW with the condition.
yeah, I got an email back from her today that says she's been on vacation, so I said, here, it's.
Congratulations.
Well, then there is
But
that.
what we've done there is we've said approved but no permit shall be issued until that material is satisfactory material is submitted to code. Because we can trust the code officer to do whatever. It's what it's supposed to do. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay. Well, we'll try it tomorrow.
Okay,
See what
but
happens.
again, the timing is in your hands. And so it should go, open the item for preliminary, and we say, yeah, it's all here, boom, now we gotta find it.
Sounds good.
And we should not have all this discussion again. It's unfortunate when you get caught up in the board's business. Now, there is another item on the agenda. The sketch plan. Is there anyone here to present the sketch plan?
It's a great meeting.
We could make it up.
So when there's nobody here to present it, do we just?
That's it.
Okay.
Is there any old business to be brought before the board? Yes,
the-
there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was the, yeah.
Are we sure we want to do that this evening? But yeah, the,
Sorry, what were you doing?
Whether I have the authority.
Okay.
Oh, that's just the size threshold.
don't, the McMullen application, I would hold on to it till next meeting.
Yes, please.
Okay, and might as well hold on to the,
The sketch plan guy.
you know,
So old business would seem to be in your court to say something, right?
Well, no, that's
No.
No.
basically me. My topic.
Or, oh, okay, so
I
you're
thought-
gonna say something.
Well, it has to do with the, whether something, major use, minor use, the 5,000 square foot
yeah.
threshold.
Right.
And I wanted this to come before John just for his expertise in it. We talked about going forward that, that demolition of a building wouldn't be counted towards the square footage. And I guess I'd ask Dwight, anything over 5,000 square feet, and we have that section that talks about, if you go over 5,000 square feet in any 5-year period, is there a particular reason why there's the time frame involved versus, let's say somebody has a 2,000 square foot building and decides, I'm gonna increase it to 6,000. Whether it was a year after he built that building or 10 years. Anytime, what I'm getting at, anytime a building goes over a multiple of 5,000 square feet, let's say it starts at 2,000, he wants to go to 6,000. Let's bring it to planning board. If he goes, then adds next year to 12,000 square feet, bring them back into planning board. I mean, because I kind of look at, I think just recently, some storage units went in on the Boggy Brook Road that were, if I'm not mistaken, were 4,950 square feet.
That's correct.
Obviously, that's to avoid coming to planning board, in my mind. Now, Mr. Gordon, who Steve Salisbury is gonna come to the planning board, has, I think, 9,500 square feet?
Yeah.
So has come to planning board. Now, the gentleman on Boggy Brook Road built 4,950 square feet. He can add another 5,000 square feet, let's say in 5 years, and never come before the planning board.
That's correct.
Something is wrong with that picture. I mean, I would say that anytime you go over that, another issue is I think it should be less than 5,000, but let's just concentrate on 5,000. Anytime a building goes over 5,000 square feet or a multiple of 5,000 square feet, it should come to the planning board.
So what you're arguing is that if it started out at 4,000, it would not have come to the planning board necessarily, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
And then if you add 2 the next year, you go to 6 total, and that's what comes to the plan, and then it would have to come to the planning board.
That's correct.
I mean, under my scenario, I mean, is there any reason even to have that 5-year time limit? I think with the way I look at it, is it wouldn't matter whether it was 1 year or 5 years.
That came from the council, John.
Yeah,
When I first came here, my limit was 1,500 square feet.
right.
And then I think it was because the planning board was so busy at that time with Myrick Street and everything, then, and I think it actually came a recommendation of the council to increase the threshold for the code enforcement officer on what we could permit. We have no personal issues any way this goes. All I ask is we have to follow procedure. If you wanna make an amendment to that ordinance, we need to present it to you for a motion and then take it to the council.
Right.
That's, in a nutshell, we really,
I mean, Janet, do you understand what I'm trying to get across? And I'm just curious what your
Yeah,
thoughts on that are.
Absolutely. I think, we've gone through this many times where there's discretionary of staff, or there's black and white, it says it right there in the ordinance. So, for example, 2,000 to 6,000, right, it's a major leap, right? So what I think of is if you're permitting something that's already an intensive use, okay? Storage units, not so intensive, but if it's 2,000 square feet of storage, right? Obviously don't think it needs to come before the planning board, can be permitted by code. You add 4,000, it becomes 6,000. The discretion within the ordinance allows the code enforcement officer and the planning office to discuss the project and say, okay, we just went from 2,000, meaning there's maybe like, I don't know, I'm making this up. I have no idea how many trips, but let's just say 20 trips per day. It's probably way more than that, but who knows? To a level now, when you increase by 4,000 square feet, you're increasing that in the intensity of the use of the project. If there's no intensity, if there's no increase in the intensity of use, I think the mindset behind it is, why are we burdening someone coming before the planning board? Not only with traffic, but other things, or a disturbance to the neighbors, or things like that. So I think that that's the mindset behind the ordinance, if I am like thinking of it, just, we don't wanna overburden an applicant with coming to a planning board, if there's no huge cause for concern. But
Well,
you're right, it's at the discretion of staff, which makes things not black and white. So including something in there that says, listen, if it's less than 5,000, it goes to code. If it's more than 5,000, it comes to planning board. Then, there's no question, there's no discretion necessary. It's either less than 5,000 or it's more than 5,000. My concern, wearing another hat for development, is that if there's no increase in intensity of use, and it's, you're not disturbing any neighbors, you're not increasing stormwater, you're not increasing traffic, you're not increasing water or sewer, or why does it need to be reviewed by the planning board? Why can it not be reviewed internally by a code enforcement office who's essentially doing the same level of review and also sending out notifications to abutters? That's the question. It's a balance.
The current criteria, if the addition is over 5,000 square feet, it comes to the planning board.
That's right.
So
But you're asking.
it doesn't matter if there's any impact,
But you
more
were-
of an impact or not, under these guidelines.
But you were asking if somebody starts with 2,000 and then 5 years later adds 4,000 to it, right? Because under the
Correct.
ordinance, they have the ability to do that, right?
Yes,
And not have to go through planning board.
correct.
So I think that what I'm saying is, I think that discretion is in here on a because every project is going to be different. There might be a project that if you add 4,000 square feet after 5 years, it's going to increase the intensity of that use, and therefore should come before the planning board and have that level of scrutiny. If it's something that's not going to intensify the use, then does it need that level? Does it need that level of scrutiny?
Jana, I think what's bothering John is a creeping big box store.
Yep,
That is, in the end, you wind up with something that should have been here in the first place.
right,
And so
so
we need
there
to have
is,
a way.
where is it in the ordinance? I can't find it.
Huh?
There is a section, and I can't find it right now, of course, when I want to see it, that basically says, if you think that someone is trying to circumvent the planning board,
Yeah, but you won't know until,
well, what I'm saying
It's not brought to our
is,
attention.
yeah.
what I'm saying is, it's, the trigger is going to be not, are you trying to circumvent planning board? The trigger is going to be, listen, you now have a level of use that is going to burden your neighbors. You're having a level of use that is increasing, is impacting health, safety, and welfare. That's when it comes to this board.
I think what John would be comfortable with is, you have your 5,000 square foot.
Mm-hmm.
If you're adding anything to it, then comes to the planning board.
Regardless of the 5-year
Yes.
period.
Regardless of
Right,
the
that's what I'm-
5 year
I mean,
Or if it goes over, or if the addition makes it something that wouldn't have come before the planning board, makes it over 5,000 feet. So the 2 to 6, for example, would come to the planning board even though there's, you know, the initial thing wasn't,
So, let me see if I can, so if I had a building that was 6,000 square feet, had been on site for 15 years, they had 1,000 square feet, you'd like to see it come to planning board?
not me.
no, but the original building would have been under the planning board, right? Because it was
Well,
6,000.
I assume. Well, anything over 1,500 square feet would have come to planning board prior to 2012.
Well, I think there needs to be a clear line of demarcation that says, here's the number that goes before the planning board or not, kind of period. Okay? If that's 5,000, it's 5,000. I'm not arguing what that number is right this second, okay? But like, there needs to be a line. Under this, it's a code enforcement issue or whatever. Over this, it's a planning board issue. If you have a use that is below 5,000 to start, and the addition or whatever, renovation even, makes it go over 5,000, then it comes before the planning board. Now, the case that you mentioned, which is, it was, 6,000 a whole long time ago, and that may be literally 10 years, 15 years, whatever. Maybe that's just a separate issue, there's a separate rule for that.
So I think I've got this now. So if I have a building and they get past that 5 years and they wanna build in, they wanna build 1,000 square feet on, you'd like to have it go back to planning board.
See, that would be my only concern is if something's 4,000 square feet, 5 years later, they say, we wanna add bathrooms and, I don't know, a hallway and maybe a couple janitorial closets. That's 1,000 square feet. You want them to come before the planning board if
Was it already
it,
5,000 square feet?
it was 4.
It was
Oh, it was
4. What she's saying, these relatively minor modifications
Yeah.
push it over the thing.
And that happens-
And indeed, at the limit, it could be, it was built at 4,900.
Yep.
And I literally add,
Right, and
whatever.
I see this, we see this with hotels, right? Because they need to come into conformance with what their chain is doing, and so they need to add modifications and do certain things that then just puts them over the edge. So if, there's a hotel chain here that needs to come into compliance with whatever, whatever brand they are, and they say, okay, we want you to fix your signage, and we also want you to add, a couple bathrooms here and a couple closets for, janitorial services, it's gonna be about, a new sign and about 1,000 square feet. That's a hotel is it's massive. Do you want them to come back before the planning board? I would say probably not, but,
But if they added a new wing, you'd certainly want them to
Right.
come to the planning board. Or if they just said, okay, we're gonna add, 3 more units at that end. I mean, you would,
Yeah.
at some point, you would definitely want to come to planning
That's
board.
right.
So the question is always, where is that line, right?
And the ordinance gives me the right to send anything to planning board, even if it's 2,000 square feet.
Right.
And just for the record, I don't want you to think I just sit in the corner and just approve these things, okay?
Really?
Because the whole
You don't do it-
staff.
you don't do it that way?
We have a TRT meeting, we have everybody there, but, you know, I think that it's come to an issue, and Michelle and I sat down and we looked at it, and, you know, you had an existing footprint of 2,500 square feet, and they took it up to 5,300 square feet. So in our mind, it wasn't a big impact, but I can understand how the planning board might feel the way you do.
Well, I guess what I can, you know, we talked earlier about, you know, sort of liability or opening up yourself to lawsuits or whatever. And I can imagine, you know, you saying, oh, this is a change in intensity or a greater intensity. And so with the same square footage involved, both in the existing building and a new building, you say, oh, well, this one doesn't need to go to the planning board, whereas this one looks very similar, but it's a less intensive use by whatever definition, doesn't need to go to it. Then it's like, oh, this developer got one set of rules and this developer got some other set of rules. And that's what that's what I would like to see be avoided.
Well, it's not some definition, it's the criteria that is listed in the ordinance that we have to look at to say, is this, and for example, for traffic do they need a modification or a change or get a DOT permit? Or is there, is there a major change in that type of traffic? That's just one of the criteria, but
Sure.
it's, so it's not like we don't have it's not a definition per se, but it's a set of criteria that is looked at to come up with that determination.
As to whether or not it's a increase in whatever.
Yeah.
But
I'd
there
like
may
to
be
take a
very well a difference. I mean, you talk about what the change, the impact to be on the neighbors and the city. And believe me, and you've heard this before and you can hear it again, is that a non-resident views that a lot different than everybody up here who lives in Ellsworth.
So are you saying that just because I live in Trenton, I'm not impacted by what happens in the city of Ellsworth?
I'm saying we look at something that happens in Ellsworth different than you do.
I don't think so. I'm
yeah,
invested into this community. I work here every single day. My child goes to daycare here. I don't think that that's a fair determination.
Well, I would like to take a chance to actually answer your question that you asked, which was 4,000 feet, and you're gonna add 1,300, now you're at 1,500. And my opinion is, yes, that should go to planning board, because you went over 5,000, and the rule has to be written somewhere. There's gotta be some fencing, right, around it. And I guess my advice would be, if you're developing, know what that limit is, and it's 5,000. And if you build a structure that's 4,000, you know you're close to that limit already, just so there's no surprises. But my answer would be yes. If you build something that's 4,000 square feet, and then a year later you add a couple of bathrooms, and now it's 5,300 square feet, we'll see you at planning board.
And the level of review for a couple of bathrooms is not gonna be
So
as complex as if you were adding showroom space. for
I'm gonna
example.
make a recommendation so we can get this off of the agenda, okay? And you can take it or leave it. This sounds like something that needs to be workshopped between staff and the board, not something that needs to keep coming up at board meetings. And I think that we would be more productive, and I think this is something that we actually need to sit down with the ordinance in front of us and work together to be able to scribble through things and write out exactly what we're thinking, because staff could go back and try to figure out what the board wants, but I think from a time perspective, it would be more helpful to sit down together in a workshop setting and flush this all out. That's just my recommendation.
I think that's a terrific.
I think it's a very good
That's
idea.
good. I
However,
agree with that.
you're making more work for us.
Tough luck.
So we
Such
want,
is life.
so we would like the
Yeah, that's right.
workshop, we'd like the workshop to be catered, thank you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Like the workshop to be catered.
Yeah, well, there is that. The details to be determined, right?
Yeah, typically with workshops, we'll hold them about an hour before the
No, I
meeting.
think that's a good, I mean, I really think it's a good idea. I think,
It could be,
They're publicly notified because you're all here.
Yeah.
And so members of the public are welcome to join in on that discussion as well.
no, they're entitled to listen.
That's right.
They're not
Listen.
entitled to
That's right.
speak.
but I think that that solar ordinance stuff could have probably profited from that sort of approach too, to to a certain degree. Because there was a lot of back and forth that was probably not necessary, that could have been resolved.
I
if everyone
think
just
when it comes.
Sitting down looking at that.
When it comes to making, this ordinance, clearly, as we've seen tonight and through many years of using this ordinance, needs some refreshing and some changing, and I think workshops are going to be necessary in order to get that done. And it seems like, considering this has been on the agenda numerous times, 3, I think.
But who's counting?
That this is a priority that we should start here. We actually have another section that we would like to look at, which would be Article 1, which I don't even have in my ordinance book right here, but it goes through procedures for basically planning board procedure when it comes to amending the ordinance or the land use map, and then the procedure that the council then uses. And there's some things in there that definitely need to be looked at and potentially changed, because staff has talked to legal counsel, and we actually go above and beyond what is necessary. That's not required by the state. That's time consuming and also monetarily consuming. So we could look at Article 1, it's 6 pages. So it's an easy read, and another place that we could go.
Also, the definitions.
Yeah, definitions, we'll get there, Mike.
The definitions in the ordinance need to be addressed based upon, so that they're in conjunction with our building code, our fire codes, and other codes, because there's definitely some disconnects between
Yeah, and I
the
know
definitions.
Michelle had talked about that.
Yeah.
And was, I think, working on that, and then she disappeared.
We know where she is, though.
But it's Article
Yeah,
14,
but
so,
there's nothing we
it's
can do
that
about
way
it.
down the chain.
So,
Now, one question, I mentioned the solar, is that going to the council?
Yes,
It is.
it's on the agenda.
Okay, I haven't seen it. And I mentioned this to the chairman before the meeting,
Yeah.
not to get into big discussions like this, but, I mean, I'd like to see, like, maybe the last item on the agenda is just general discussion. Basically to give staff a chance to keep us up to date on maybe projects that we've come in on a sketch review, and they haven't come back yet, but just to kind of update us. I
Yep.
mean, we're kind of still waiting for Black House to come in, I mean, stuff like that, just
Absolutely.
Plus, there's another plus to this. It gives us permission to go off on tangents.
I know I want
I
to.
think you need a permission.
Well, there are legitimate tangents and there are illegitimate tangents.
if the chairman would stop calling in sick, we wouldn't have this on the agenda item. for
If
several
you could
months.
guarantee that I wouldn't get sick,
Are you now asking for a motion to adjourn? Is that what that?
no, because we're still talking, aren't we?
I'm
Are you
done.
ready? I'm ready for a motion to adjourn. Is anyone else?
Yes, I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Because there are no Mylars, right?
No.
Okay, everyone in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Okay,